Call to order a meeting for the Normal Council for Monday, June 16th. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz? Here. Mr. Byers?
Here.
Mr. Roberge?
Here.
Ms. Smith? Here. Mr. McCarthy?
Here. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a number of public commenters tonight, so we'll begin with public comment. Most of you are probably aware of our rules for public comment. Because there are so many, I'm going to be a little strict on the time frame. So we just ask you to come forward, state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to make your comments. First commenter is Tracy Pat Kunis.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and town staff. My name is Tracy Pat Kunis, and I am the president of the Mid-Illinois Realtors Association. On behalf of our almost 500 members who advocate on behalf of private property owners, I appreciate the opportunity to provide comment on the short-term rental ordinance on the agenda tonight. We oppose the ordinance because of its effective ban on short-term rentals in R1 and R2 zoning districts. Realtors are champions of our community, and we want the best for Normal. We support policies that are fair, pro-growth, and promote a housing market that works for everyone. One of the most important things realtors do is to advocate for private property rights. A basic right of private property ownership is the right to rent. We're sensitive to all the comments that have been presented to you over the last 7 months or so regarding the short-term rentals. That said, we firmly believe that tonight represents an important opportunity for you to choose to find a solution that works for all who are affected by the short-term rentals. MIRA opposes the proposed short-term rental ordinance for 2 major reasons. Number one, it limits the fundamental right of a property owner to rent a non-owner occupied property and contains no rational justification for such infringement. Renting one's property is not a privilege. It's a fundamental right to property ownership. Number two, it places higher value on anecdotal evidence than on the data-driven solutions. In order to justify the need for a ban on short-term rentals in certain zoning districts, the town should demonstrate that a disproportionate amount of problems in a residential neighborhood is caused by the short-term rentals as compared with other forms of residential occupancy. We even have a member of our association who has a property adjacent to a short-term rental and has never had any issues with it or with the behavior of those who rent it. And instead of passing this ordinance, MIRA requests that the staff develop standards to define problematic properties using evidence-based criteria such as formal complaints, police reports, etc. This would allow for more transparency between the short-term rental operators and the town. Other municipalities have had luck working directly with platforms to mitigate future risks and identify operators who are not fulfilling their responsibilities. Through these mechanisms, properties can be objectively evaluated and reviewed administratively. Thanks for giving us further consideration to the effects of this proposed ordinance.
Our next commenter is Robert McClellan.
My name's Robert McClellan. I'm an internal auditor and a real estate investor here in Normal. Just offer some summary comments. So I was looking forward to some very deep analysis and thorough investigation of this topic on the short-term rental ban. Bloomington Normal Economic Development Council had sponsored research into our local real estate market. They had devised that there's quite a bit of shortfall in our real estate supply, and that was causing pricing issues and pressure on rents and home prices. I was pretty surprised and frustrated to discover that actually it's the 50 or 60 short-term rentals that apparently are providing the upward pressure on price. That's 1/3 of 1% of our housing supply in Normal that is apparently responsible for this inflation in pricing and rents, when actually the two are competing. If prices are high and rents are high, then landlords and investors would be more better off doing the long-term rentals rather than STRs, so the two are not corollary, they are competitive pressures. The document also fails to represent the scale and impact of STRs according to the actual big picture. It just focuses on these 50 or 60 properties. It tells a story about owners that are out of state and out of community, when in fact the document also shows that 30 out of the 42 owners are here in town. So we're local investors. It fails to contextualize the property investment claims. Its arbitrary number of $20,000 is singled out. Based on what? Based on what context? What is the larger community investment average? Ignores the broader housing shortage by that study I referenced. Discounts the economic service and contributions of short-term rentals, their constituents, their investors, disregards the human reality of these people who are visiting our community. We've worked very hard to attract economic investment, employers, visitors, and now we're just going to characterize them as decreasing the value of our neighborhood environment. We already have neighbors. We've had bad neighbors. We have codes for those things. Why are those existing codes inadequate in this case to enforce the character of our neighborhoods? I see no reference here in this document that explains why the rules we already have aren't good enough in these instances. There's no explanation of the specific concerns or complaints. Everything is generalized. There's no contextual data or research offered. I was very disappointed with the veracity of this investigation and the summary complaints or justifications for what is realistically a huge infringement on my property rights and another door for economic opportunity just being slammed in my face after I have put so much work to build something of value in this community. I'm very disappointed.
Next speaker is Renee Bradley.
Good evening. My name is Renee Bradley. I live at 1303 North Walnut Street. Like many of the other residents speaking tonight, I favor the council moving to eliminate short-term rentals in single-family zoned areas. I think it may be worthwhile to hear from a resident who does not have a dog in this fight. We have lived a total of 29 years in Normal, having recently returned and invested in a single-family home. We are not anxious to see a revolving hotel next door. We have hotels in areas zoned to manage the traffic and parking concerns with short-term rentals. And I'm confident that you will vote to manage this at some point, although I remain a bit puzzled as to why it's taken so long. Clearly, someone in this building oversees this, but that's another story, I guess. I urge you to consider a 3-year plan, at most, to return these neighborhoods to their single-family status. It just doesn't seem right to cater to the zoning offenders who own these properties. 5 years must seem like an eternity to those who are waiting for peace and quiet in their R1A neighborhood. Reviewing your recently released figures, I don't think they need to be 5 years to return these to either long-term rentals or to sell these properties for people who are looking for housing. Let's do a little fuzzy math in a minute. The low figure for these residences would probably be around $300 a night. If they are renting for just one weekend a year, that would be $1,872 in tax times the 60 rentals. That would equal almost enough to pay one staff member to manage this. Got to keep up here. Okay, let's see where I'm at here. Okay. Equaling more than $100,000 in tax dollars. So I urge you to amend or postpone your vote for a 3-year return to single-family resident status rather than 5 years. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tom Collins.
My name is Thomas Collins. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to the council. I have a fundamental right to feel safe in my home. I have a fundamental right to know that my children and grandchildren will be safe when they come to my house and play in the yard. We live at 709 North School. 711 North School is a short-term rental. Beautiful property. It would be a lovely home for a family, but it is a short-term rental, and there are problems. This last weekend, there were 5 pickup trucks parked there. I own a F-150. It looked like a Volkswagen compared to these. They had enormous tires. They sounded like jets taking off, and there was a total of 12 people staying there. We saw them carry in their luggage and carry out their luggage. That house is supposed to only have 7. It has 3 bedrooms, but it was 12 people there staying the weekend. Now, when they left, they tore out of the alley, going 20, 25 miles an hour, where children are, where pets are, and we called the police and made a police report because this is a very dangerous situation. Now, the people that are for the short-term rentals are for making money. Bottom line, this is not for the town, this is not for the community, it is to make money. And it is making money at the expense of the safety of the people in the community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gene Olson. Next speaker is Thomas Wallace.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Wallace. I have some comments on the short-term rental ban, obviously. That's what we're all here for. The report I read that is available, and I hope the council read it as well, seems incomplete. The data is hasty in its conclusions. It says the recent history. Well, what is the time frame on the recent history? 6 months, 2 years, 5 years since the inception of Airbnbs in the town. What does that have to do for the overall issue? Or are these things that we can serve, or are these things that we can solve on a short-term solution? Complaints have been made, to the exception of the most recent speaker. Where's the police report data listed in the report that is available to us? In the report, it unfairly categorizes the people staying in Airbnbs as tenants. They do not sign a lease. They're not tenants. I can appreciate that there's some gray area in the verbiage. However, the source of complaint from the town standpoint, from zoning code, lies on a lot of buzzwords: tenants, cohesive neighborhoods. Neighbors should be able to talk to each other. Neighbors should be able to speak to strangers. Neighbors should be able to solve their problems prior to instituting a ban that will affect homeowners from their property rights. The report speaks to revitalization, and it puts a value and a dollar limit on it. Is there a dollar limit that the town would deem acceptable for homeowners to spend on their properties? Would that exempt us if there was a dollar amount? It cites permittability for those projects. You don't need a permit to paint. You don't need a permit to change your toilet. You don't need a permit to change your thermostat. There are significant updates that can be done within a house that don't require permitting, and my bank account and my credit card can speak to that. If the issue is with respect to housing and how it affects the stock of the community, are we going to institute a ban on people that are snowbirds? They leave their house empty for half the year and they go someplace else, but then they flip it and they come back to us and leave their house empty someplace else. So if we're looking at all the problems for housing stock, is that not something that is going to be considered? You can't choose your neighbors. Anybody could have the same issues in any neighborhood under any other circumstance. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Catherine Metzger.
Good evening. My deceased husband's family owned a house on the corner of Eastview Drive and College Avenue from 1962 to 2005. I recently repurchased that home after 15 years being out of the family, and that is a very sentimental home for my family, from holidays, family celebrations. And I renovated it so my family and my husband's family could come and visit because they don't live here. I spent 8 months and over $200,000 renovating this home, spending money with local contractors, tradespeople, masons, designers, and all local. I employed many, many people, and I worked very diligently to make sure this house was well taken care of. I wanted to offset a little bit of the cost by allowing some short-term rentals. I rent maybe at the most twice a month, and maximum 6 people in the home. They have to park in the driveway. The neighbors have my personal cell number, and if there are any problems, they have been told to call me. I also have cameras everywhere. I will tell you, the house across the street, the yellow house that has 6 students in it, caused more problems than my short-term rental. I also believe that, like many people, I've reviewed this report, and very anecdotal. There are very little specific data. I fall into one of the categories that I don't live in Bloomington or Normal, but I live in McLean County. I live 10 minutes from the house where that I have as a short-term rental. Many times it's just rented to my family. So I really would like you to table this, reconsider, and we never, as members of this community, I also employ people. I employ the people who clean the house, snow removal, lawn, pest control. So I do spend a lot of money for that. But I would like you to table this and look at other options, because these 2 options do not seem reasonable for even those people who are against this. There really needs to be better information to those of us who also are short-term rental owners. We did not get any notification, and trying to find this is quite difficult. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate all the work that you do.
Our next speaker is Andrew Batty, if I got that right.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Batty, and I'm a long-term resident and a local short-term rental host. My family and I have proudly hosted over 1,000 stays since 2019. We are among the first hosts in town, and when the concept of home sharing was beginning to take shape here, what started as a simple rental evolved into something more meaningful, a welcoming space where memories are made, milestones celebrated, and lives touched. We're not absentee landlords. We are at our property every day, checking in, maintaining the space, and making sure everything is secure and respectful of the neighborhood. We've installed security cameras, enforced strict house rules, and personally meet guests whenever possible. We take pride in being involved and present and accountable. What makes our approach different in our relationship with the neighbors, we've built strong, genuine connections with people who live around our properties. Some of them now help us with the business, whether it's lawn care, cleaning, or checking in on the house when we're away. We pay our neighbors for their time and services, creating a small local ecosystem in support of opportunity. We're not offering a place to sleep, we're offering an experience. Over the years, we've hosted families reuniting, Special Olympics participants and their loved ones, cancer survivors, and people undergoing treatment. They needed a peaceful retreat close to the hospital, and we provided that. We've also hosted bachelor and bachelorette celebrations, wedding guests, birthday guests, and people who simply need to escape for a few days and laugh with their friends. To show you just how much this space means to those who visited, we brought a selection of handwritten notes that I would happily share with you guys at your convenience. There's the examples are the coolest house they've ever stayed in. This place created memories that'll last a lifetime. These notes are more than just thank yous. They're proof that short-term rentals can have a deep positive impact on real people. We understand the concerns that led to this ban. We ask you that you look beyond the headlines and see the reality of responsible hosts who care deeply about their community, who uphold the values of safety, respect, and hospitality, and who contribute meaningful to the local economy, especially in ways traditional lodging simply cannot. Lifting this ban or even adjusting it with reasonable guardrails would allow families like ours to continue offering something truly special, a safe, welcoming, and memorable home away from home, while remaining thoughtful stewards of the neighborhood we love. Thank you for your time. I also invite any one of you to visit our arcade houses with your families, talk to the neighbors, and just enjoy the space and realize that's more than just making money like some people think it is. It's more about developing and helping the community, not just a money-making opportunity. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Liz Austin.
Good evening. My name is Liz Austin, and I'm a small business owner here in Normal. For a decade, my husband and I lived and worked in the People's Republic of China. Living in Shanghai, it wasn't uncommon to walk down the street and find that a restaurant, a bar, a shop had disappeared overnight. No notice, no explanation. The decision had been made, and that was that. The government would present a carefully packaged narrative after the fact, but everyone knew the decision came first and the data came later, curated to fit the agenda. Well, I never thought I'd feel that same way here in a town that I was born and raised in, but here we are. So I want to reference the workshop that kicked all of this off, the one in October. In the work session video, which can be found on the town's YouTube channel, at roughly minute 41, the town manager invites our town planner to present and states, the team here coming to the table is going to do a short presentation, a handful of slides or so, to show you what we've learned and what the situation is regarding short-term rentals. And then what we're going to ask of council tonight is direction. And then just a few minutes later, roughly at minute 47, after walking through a slide identifying all of the issues with short-term rentals, our town planner quickly and casually stated in an afterthought comment, there are certainly positives, and you've heard some this evening from the person who came to testify. So that's not that there aren't positives as well as negatives. So how does that work? How can the town recommend something with only the issues with short-term rentals, without doing your due diligence, without talking to small business owners, without digging into the why they are even popular here in Normal and who rents them out? To be clear, I do not mean to throw anyone under the bus, but it is my duty as a constituent of this town to hold this council responsible for what you promised to do to represent this community. That wasn't a balanced presentation. It was a passing remark, and it was clear to me that the benefits of short-term rentals to our community and the voices of small business owners were not included, and most likely not even explored. We were left out completely. I was frustrated but naively optimistic after hearing you, Mr. Mayor, give an interview to WGLT, stating that the town would take the next 6 months to really investigate short-term rentals, and even stated that they would reach out to business owners to get perspective. And yet here we are. The final report was published on Friday early evening with only 3 pages of information, most of it nothing new, and absolutely biased towards all of the issues of short-term rentals and not the benefits. It feels like the decision was already made and the data was being shaped to support it. So let's break down the arguments. Number 1, compliance. In November, many short-term rentals weren't registered, but now, according to your own report, 66 are. So good job, we did it, team. Next is taxes. So let's assume that 66 are officially registered and we finally have a foundation. That's 66 properties contributing to the local economy and most importantly, our budget. According to AirDNA, another incredibly useful site to explore data regarding short-term rentals, I found that the average stay in Normal varies, but averages $175 a night, and properties are booked at 50 to 60% occupancy. If you do the math, that's over $118,000 annually. That's not a problem. There's your budget. And as you stated, Mr. Mayor, in the interview, and I will quote, we would almost have to hire someone to monitor it. Well, there you go. There's your investment. And I would be willing to guess that you could do that in less than 40 hours a week. Finally, and this one hits hardest the most, are complaints. You've built much of the proposal on complaints, not police reports, not verified violation complaints. But where's the data? We are seeing accusations being treated as fact. And I speak to my experience. Some of them have been absolutely outrageous and often slanderous. But again, nobody contacted me to seek the truth. And I have documented evidence of the truth, as most of us do, because we have cameras set up to monitor all activity, including the number of guests. And that is to protect us, our neighborhood, and safety and security. Finally, every neighbor around us has our contact number directly. But that information was left out tonight. No due process, no investigation. And again, I experienced this firsthand in China, and it's terrifying. But here in Normal, it seems that all it takes is unverified complaints, and that somehow becomes enough to push through legislation affecting dozens of businesses and thousands of guests. You said you would take 6 months to do your due diligence.
Ms. Austin, I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. Are you Mr. Austin?
Yeah, so he's taken the second part.
Go right ahead.
Yeah.
Can take
Well,
30
you're
seconds
well
of my
over
time.
your time.
Yes, yes.
I'll be quick
He's quick, trust
to
me.
make up.
So the end of it is, you said you would do your due diligence. You said you would talk to short-term business rental owners. You said, but this was about finding the right approach, but none of that happened. And what's worse, the people you've ignored are the very people that you serve, your constituents, small business owners, and the guests. So to hand that over, I'm going to give that to James to explain what was missing from the report.
Good evening. My name is James Austin, and I'm here to share some more context that was missing from the short-term rental report in October, and again missing from the memo shared last Friday. If we're voting on the future of STRs in Normal, let's actually talk about what they are and the real service they provide. We've heard about zoning and complaints. What's been left out is the need, purpose, and value. Just last month, many of you voted to rezone land in our neighborhood because it aligned with the town's strategic growth goals. Well, I'm here to say, so do we. According to AirDNA, occupancy rates in Normal hover at around 50 to 60%. That's big. There is a need. The average guest rating here is 4.7 out of 5 stars. That's exceptional. Many hosts, including us, have superhost status, which requires responsiveness, 0 cancellations, and consistent 5-star stays. In other words, these aren't casual rentals. These are professionally run, well-reviewed, and carefully maintained. And the guests, they're families. Since opening in September 2024, we've hosted 66 bookings. 62 of them were directly tied to this community through ISU events, funerals, weddings, reunions, visiting friends and relatives in the holidays, and of course, the Special Olympics. Over half stayed 3 nights or more because they needed space to cook, rest, and be together.
Mr. Austin, I'm going to ask you to sum it up.
Okay. What we ask is that you stop treating us like a loophole to close and start to treat us as the community asset that we are and partner with us to grow this town. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Melanie Shalito.
Hello, I'm Melanie Shalito. I live in Old North Normal neighborhood, and I spoke to the council early on about my concerns with the number and the possible massive proliferation of STRs in our historic neighborhood. That still is a concern because I think that there is a tipping point where too many does indeed sort of unravel a really important fabric of our neighborhood. But where I guess my point for this evening is that I was pretty disappointed, as others have said, with kind of the superficial nature of this document and this ordinance. To be honest, and maybe this is just my understanding, bureaucracy tends to not swing real heavy one way or the other, but find a fine line. So I am actually surprised at the sort of black and white binary approach to the ordinance. I think there's nuance that needs to be considered, and as people have spoken here this evening, it's not a black and white issue. And so I was very surprised to see like a full ban, especially based on sort of a very high-level, general lack of detail, lack of, as Liz pointed out, due diligence with the owner. So I understood that one of the solutions under consideration was limiting the saturation of Airbnbs. Liz Austin's Airbnb is in my neighborhood. I know there are a couple people who find fault with it, but, and I'm just going to admit to some hypocrisy here to you this evening. I stayed at her Airbnb. I needed it a couple weeks ago for some work people coming into town. We needed a place for brainstorming and working, and Liz was an unbelievable host. We were very quiet. I promise you we were good neighbors, but there's an attention to how her residents live within the neighborhood that I can vouch for. It was important. And so hypocrisy aside, the other thing that I guess I want to point out is there's another issue on the table in addition to the STRs, and I'm not sure if it gets swept up in this ordinance, and that's the idea of ADUs in properties. There still is a housing situation. I think there is an opportunity to address some of the density in our neighborhoods with ADUs. And so I guess I'm really more just curious if the language here, being as big and broad as it is, does that preclude future conversations about zoning for ADUs? In my opinion, where the biggest concern with STRs is the removal of residents, so it's renters or residents, ADUs offer the opportunity of residents and as opposed to or. So I would just encourage the council to also think about language and whether or not we're kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face on this when it comes to density. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker is Nick Sanchez.
Good evening. Don't want to take up too much of your time because it doesn't sound like mine's very serious compared to what you guys are doing right now. So I'm going to get out of your hair as quickly as I can. I'm Nick Sanchez. I was just here to just give you a little context of what we're trying to do over on Adelaide Street. We want to get a building rezoned so we can bring in a training center for youth that are unable to pay for the training that they need, and I think they should be getting to kind of get into a better team, whether it be a travel team, whether it be a high school team, or whether it be something even further like college. And so just wanted to give a little context to who I am and where I'm, kind of leading with this project. My name, like I said, was Nick Sanchez, originally from Chicago, played at Mount Carmel, went to school at DePaul University, and over the last 25 years, I've been coaching youth sports and putting together youth development programs for both Chicago, up in Wisconsin, and now Central Illinois. I've partnered with two other coaches in town, and we're just looking to have this small building. It's about 6,500 square feet. We're going to turf it, put some squat racks in it, hitting cages, and just try to bring in kids that are unable to kind of pay for those large lessons, whether it be at other places around town, and just give them the opportunity to be able to train and get ready to play the sports that they love. We don't want to make sure we don't want to make it look like it's just squat racks and batting cages. We take a lot of pride into the youth development programming that we do, and we offer tutoring to help them if they have any issues with their homework or any projects that they may have. And in turn, it's a huge mentoring opportunity too for other coaches and other adults to come in and meet with the kids. We like to bring in past athletes that are usually playing in college right now, whether it be a young woman playing softball at a college or whether it be a young man playing football at a local college here in town. So as you go ahead to kind of think about the rezoning, the building that you're going to think about is basically going to be the capacity of about 80 to maybe 70 kids on a great day. And just would like you to think a little bit more about what we're going to be doing when you think about rezoning it. Thank you.
And our last speaker of the evening is Rick Anhalt.
I was hoping you weren't going to get to me. All cards on the table. I'm the silent partner in 7-Eleven along with my wife. I want to start out by saying the gentleman who lives at 709, I think he was wrong by one truck. If he's talking about the situation I'm aware of, there were 6 trucks and they were cleaning up a lot of the completely overgrown tree foliage on the property line between 7-Eleven and 709. I think that's what he's talking about. I want to share with you something that I found rather incredible, me agreeing with the Chicago Tribune editorial page. This is from Friday, June 13th, 2025, not completely, of course. We don't see any evidence of Chicago or Bloomington Normal having some massive Airbnb, Airbnb problem. This is a city, a town that needs to expand its tourist base, not suppress it by killing Airbnbs. For sure, there's a danger of people holding parties in these places or using them to drink underage. But some people also behave badly in hotel rooms and private residences. Laws are on the books that can be enforced without preventing the rentals in the first place. And we have no problems with the registration procedure that can help police if a rental is proving to be a repeat problem. We agree with that completely. Finally, the city council, the town council should leave this well alone. I agree completely. I also want to go just on a personal anecdote in my last 50 seconds. I've said this story many times. I've gotten choked up many times. In 1983, I moved into this town with my family because of Brit Airways and my job. Brit Airways was sold in late 1985, and by 1987, my wife and I had to make a choice. Do we move to Charlotte, North Carolina, where my new job was, or should we stay here? We looked around and we said, this is a nice place because of what your predecessors did and what you folks are doing now, this continues to be a nice place. My wife was one of the people who was here just a few weeks ago collecting Harmon Grant funds because of what she does for the benefit of this community with Seedling Theater. Liz Austin and James Austin are my daughter and son-in-law. I made sure they gave out the numbers to all the neighbors. This is our community. We want what's best for this community. If we thought Airbnb was a hindrance, we would not invest in it. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment tonight. We move to omnibus agenda items that will be taken with a single vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Ron?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Items considered under omnibus tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting of June 2nd, 2025, a report to receive and file Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of June 11th, 2025, a resolution authorizing the execution of an agreement for technical planning services with the McLean County Regional Planning Commission, a resolution to award a contract to Play Illinois for the purchase of modular playground equipment and rubber surfacing under the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program, and that's for West Anderson Park, and in the amount of $102,918.10, and an associated budget adjustment, and an ordinance establishing industrial pretreatment sewer regulations. Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Roberge?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Those items are approved. We have two items of general orders tonight. The first is an ordinance amending various sections of the town's zoning code.
Move approval.
Second.
I think you've all read through that. Ms. Reese, do you have any comments on that? Or no. Quite a bit of housekeeping being done, so if there are any questions on that from the council? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Roberge?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That ordinance is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance amending Chapter 22 of the Town Code having to do with short-term rental licensing.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Reese, I think we have a staff report
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
prior
and
to council discussion.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll invite Mr. Day and Ms. Davison forward. I'll start with just a few opening comments, then they'll present to council basically information on why we're making the recommendation we are this evening. Obviously, we've heard from a dozen speakers tonight, a good 8 or 9 on this particular topic. As council knows, we held a work session in October of 2024. We sat through the work session. I've watched it a couple times to make sure staff has kept up on council's comments, and we want to do our best to make sure we're hitting all the issues that we heard of then and that we've been made aware of since. So basically, following that work session in October, there were 3 main takeaways from council's conversation. Concerns about maintaining neighborhood character because of disruptions and problems that we had been made aware of. Yes, some anecdotal. Another takeaway, protect the housing stock, because we have been involved in many, many conversations in recent couple of years about housing availability and affordability, and that this is a community priority. Another primary takeaway was preserving the integrity of our zoning code. And we talked a little bit about that in October, and we'll talk a little bit about that this evening. Of course, in addition, topic of discussion was trying to recognize short-term rental owners and their investments and their desire to operate successful business enterprises. And of course, that's a consideration, but that doesn't always reconcile with other single-family property owners' positions, particularly those next door or near short-term rental. Therefore, staff has prepared an ordinance that we are going to present to council for consideration this evening. It doesn't check all the boxes. There are people who are not going to like it. We want to take some time, though, to explain why we're making the recommendation we are. So Planning and Zoning Director Mercy Davison and Assistant City Manager Brian Day will kind of walk us through. Then we'll turn it back over to Mayor Coos for council conversation. So Mercy?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and just briefly walk through a little bit of history on this for those of you in the audience who maybe aren't aware of all of this, and to just set the stage for where we are today. As we know, back in 2018, the town implemented our first regulations for short-term rentals, and that was really at the behest of the hotel-motel industry, which at the time was concerned that residences were being used as hotel units without any of the inspections and taxes that were imposed upon hotels themselves. So the solution at that time, given that there were only 16 of them and no one could really imagine that this would really go anywhere, the solution was to implement a registration requirement, a payment of the hotel-motel tax, and then compliance with our zoning regulations, particularly as it pertains to the number of unrelated people permitted to live at any particular address. By 2024, we had been receiving an increasing number of complaints from normal residents, and the complaints you're aware of, we've heard some of these tonight, primarily the unease of having properties next door or on your block where there are just different people coming and going routinely throughout any given month, essentially strangers that you never get to know because they're only on the premises for a couple of days. There were also issues related to guest behavior, parking pressure, just the number of people, and then the events, like more events happening at these properties. We'd also gotten calls from residents who lived near a house that would go up for sale, and we would hear questions about, or the question would be, oh, could this house become a short-term rental or an Airbnb, is what people would usually say. And when I would say, yes, that's permitted under these certain regulations, the question was always, how is that even possible? That's just running a business in your house. So I realize some of you have gotten complaints as well in the last couple of years. So we were directed to give a discussion or a presentation back in October at the work session, and Ms. Reese kind of went through that. I'll just bring up a slide to show you what was going on at that point in time. There were about 63 short-term rentals in Normal. Of those, about a third were registered and paying their taxes. And then within the 63 we had at the time, the vast majority were in R1 and R2 zoning. So 57 to be specific. So almost all of them were in R1 and R2. The average purchase price of these properties, if you just looked at the purchases after 2019, was about $173,000, which here is really quite affordable at this point. We did a lot of research into how other communities regulated these and presented those to you in October as well. Some of our biggest issues at the time was looking at how it's impacting the most affordable units that are available for purchase or for rent. As these units come off the market for long-term residents, long-term, of course, being anyone longer than 30 days, that would impact the housing ecosystem that we're living in. And also, we had mentioned the disruption of the residential nature of our residential districts, and also how difficult it is to regulate unrelated people in a market of folks that are just coming and going so quickly. So this past year, the moratorium went into effect. Since that time, we have had 66 short-term rentals register and comply with our ordinance. You can see that the vast majority are still in R1 and R2. That would be 49 of the 66. There are 13 in R3 zoning and 4 in various commercial districts. We also have 5 short-term rentals we've been dealing with for months now that are out of compliance and operating illegally. Recently, we've heard from a couple of neighborhood HOAs that are concerned enough about STRs that they are working toward amending their HOA guidelines to prohibit them. We don't know if that will go through, but it's an active discussion. And notwithstanding the fact that we sent all of these folks all of our rules when the moratorium began, more than a third of them are advertising themselves for quite a few guests. Granted, they could all be related. It's possible you could have 7, 8, 9, 12 people that are in the same family. It is possible, but it's not entirely likely. And then when you read the comments on many of these rentals, you'll see that they really are. They're having events there, not necessarily the kind that is like a party that's, you know, a rager or something that you would call the police about, but that has several people there for an event that's just not a residential use. There are business meetings that go on. There are parties that go on, and you can just read this in the comments. So that's been going on, even though people are aware, should be aware of the limits on residential use and the number of people that are allowed to be there. Of the 66, there are 42 different owners. About 46% of them are either in Normal or Bloomington, and most of the rest of them are in Illinois somewhere. They're not. It's not like most of these are owned by out-of-state entities, but we do have about half that are either Normal or Bloomington. We did explain in the report the investment history on these, and it was mentioned by one of the commenters that looking at permitted work is, you know, work that requires a permit to perform the whatever work you're doing. That doesn't capture everything. People can certainly do cosmetic work that can cost real money too. You don't get a permit for painting or putting in new carpet. But as far as permitted work that's making permanent improvements to the properties, you can see the numbers on the screen. The average is like $15,000, with, of course, outliers where people have put in more money than that. But in general, the bulk of the work being done is less than $20,000. So we found that to be important in considering whether these investments are something that are bringing back a lot of our houses from some sort of blighted status, and that just isn't the case in Normal. It is in some communities, but not here. These are the kinds of investments you would expect many people to make in a home. So we have, it has already been mentioned, the goals that we're looking to address are protecting our housing stock, particularly in the range of affordability. We know that we have a housing shortage, and we're trying to work on that all the time. 66 units being taken out of circulation may not sound like a big number, but when you see how difficult it is for the private sector to build housing, it does make a difference. We know that the median price of housing has gone up significantly in the last few years. A resale home has increased from $167,000 in 2020 to $232,000 in 2023. Are short-term rentals the entire explanation for that? Of course not, but it is a part of, again, the ecosystem that is driving up costs. The same can be said for rental prices, which have gone up more than 40% in 5 years. So this is a significant issue for us, and we think STRs are certainly not helping that. We're looking to reduce disruption in single-family districts. The complaints we do get are primarily related to single-family neighborhoods. Again, and even with the notice that we've provided, many of these continue to operate outside of our zoning rules. And when we look at preserving zoning integrity, you know, bottom line, these are running businesses in a home, and that's really hard for people to swallow when that's not what they bought their house thinking would happen next door. So crafting any special regulations just for short-term rentals would beg the question as to why we wouldn't do that for other types of home-based businesses. So we, again, did research quite heavily what other communities are doing. We provided a summary in the packet. There are many ways you can regulate these. You can have geographic solutions where you just separate them or have a density cap. That is problematic in the sense that it doesn't address the issue of it being a business running out of a home in a neighborhood. It would also require that we grandfather in all of the current short-term rentals, which is something that we're already experiencing issues with, and again, doesn't solve that fundamental problem. Another way to do this would just be to create an intensive regulatory system. That could include anything from, you know, annual inspections, providing guest lists, having site plan submittals, all that sort of thing. Again, though, this doesn't address the issue of running a public-facing business in your single-family home. And the final option is to prohibit them in various areas of the community, which is what we're proposing tonight. That is what we're recommending in the report, and that would, again, eliminate public-facing businesses in the residential districts, thus preserving our zoning integrity and preserving housing units in a time of significant need, particularly in an affordable range. And the 5-year amortization period, though, would help protect the investment that people have made up to this point in time. This would continue to allow rentals to happen. We have on so many occasions in public, strongly defended the right of people to rent their properties. And we believe that and will continue to protect that. It's important for the whole community that we have rentals, and that can include long-term rentals that are, only 3, 4, or 5 months. We know people come through here with different jobs and other reasons to be here. That this would not restrict that. It's just short-term rentals that are less than 30 days. So we find that to be a very reasonable solution.
Mr. You looked like you were going to supplement a couple things that Ms. Davis has said.
Sure, I just want to kind of talk about, again, the goals that came out of that work session were the 3 that Ms. Davis had mentioned, which was to decrease the disruption, to ensure the validity of our zoning. I think that's a big issue, and that comes up a lot. And when we hear complaints, it's how on earth are you letting people operate businesses next door to me? And typically, we don't. We've got a history of going after people who violate the rules about operating businesses in residential neighborhoods. We'll ticket them, we'll go to court and make them stop. For some reason, short-term rentals gets a pass. They get to operate a hotel room where nobody else gets to operate a business. And so we've got to look at why this one particular thing. If we start making special rules for these, why not the yoga studio next door? Why not the doctor's office? Why not any litany of things that we've already told people that they're not allowed to do? So that's a big consideration. When we go through the 3 goals that were given to us at that work session, really the ban is the only one that meets all 3. That's the only one that gives us an answer to all 3 of the goals that were put before us. We could look at some regulations, but again, that's not going to help us with the housing. That's not going to help us with the business in residential zoning issues. We could look at, special uses have come up. Why can't it be a special use? Well, that's business is a special use in a zoning district. 1, we don't have any other businesses as special uses in a zoning. Also, as we've learned in probably the very recent past, special use is as long as somebody meets the criteria under the ordinance, there's no special use that says, well, you can put it here unless we don't like it in that particular location. It has to be you can ask for a special use as long as you meet the specific criteria, you're allowed to have it. We can't say no. So a special use we don't think would work in any of these situations because probably they'd all meet the criteria for getting one. You'd have the neighbors come in and tell you that they don't want these next door. You'd sit there and say, okay, and then turn around and have to grant the special use over those objections. So we don't think that that's a good fit for what we're looking to do. So when we look through all of the available options, this was the option that hit all of the criteria that council had told us to look at back in October.
Thanks. Thank you. I think, Mayor, I think that's generally the summary of how we got to this point. Certainly happy to answer questions and stay out of council's way as you all discuss it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a robust conversation about this. I've talked to many of you multiple times about this ordinance, and it's pretty clear to me initially where the thought process of this council is in majority, and having done that, talking with staff and looking for an amendment on the short-term rental to include the allowance of owner-occupied renting. So can I have a motion for that?
Sure, Mayor. I'll make an amendment for an exception to Part A of the details in our packet to exclude owner-occupied residents for short-term rentals in districts R1 and R2.
Do I have a second?
Mayor, I was going to say, just for the discussion purposes, I definitely want to discuss that amendment, but I did want to ask some questions of staff first. If that makes sense after the amendment's made, that's fine, but.
That's kind of my thought. I know that the council's will is to do that amendment, so I thought we'd clear that up, get the amendment on the table, and then have the broader discussion. I'm not trying to limit discussion on this at any point. Anything you want to talk about in this amendment?
Okay.
Point of procedural question here. Do our comments have to be limited to just the amendment of owner occupied? I think that's cutting short the
For
broader
the
issue.
amendment, I would like it that way, that we talk about whether or not we're going to open it to that. If you feel that there's something that affects that amendment, sure, talk about that. But I want to leave plenty of room for discussion overall.
Because I have many questions for the staff for the amendment, or for the motion, the item as proposed, that I would like the latitude to be able to ask.
Sure, certainly. But I'm just asking that we look at the amendment. It's your choice to talk about it. I'm certainly not going to limit that.
Will my questions be disallowed because they will not be pertinent to the amendment?
So what I'm trying to do is allow any question you have as this goes forward through.
Any
Now,
question.
if you feel it's important for the amendment and relevant to the amendment, I'd ask that you do that.
But some of mine will be not pertinent to the amendment. When can I ask those questions?
And when we go into a broader discussion, I think that's the time for those.
Will we get
And
to that? Will we get to that discussion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very important that we have that discussion.
Absolutely. Very good.
Mayor, I'll second the motion.
Thank you. So we have an amendment. I've asked Mr. McCarthy that, just so we're clear, I'd ask staff to kind of flesh that out, our legal counsel. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and give us some language there.
Sure. So I did have a chance prior to the meeting to research some owner occupancy amendments language that could be used. I was aware that there may be some appetite to do something like this. And so if I can a little bit expound on Mr. McCarthy's amendment, and perhaps he could take this language and amend his amendment to incorporate this. What I had drawn up is an exception to subsection A. So just to kind of level set with everybody, section 22.25-15A of the proposed ordinance is the part we're kind of talking about here. It's on page 8-9 of the packet if you want to take a look at it. It's a one-sentence paragraph that prohibits any operation of a short-term residential rental unit in R1A, R1B, or R2. So really the crux of the issue here for this discussion's purposes. And so the amendment that I've drawn up, and I do have copies with me, Mayor, if you'd like me to circulate them at any point, is an exception to subsection A, that prohibition in R1 and R2 zoning districts. And so the amendment, or the exception, excuse me, would read, notwithstanding subsection A, a property located in an R1 or R2 zoning district may be operated as a short-term residential rental unit if that property is the primary residence of the owner occupant of the property. And then it goes on to state subsection B1, primary residence means the dwelling unit in which the owner occupant resides for at least 9 months out of a 12-month period. Primary residence is demonstrated by showing that as of the date of registration of the dwelling on a short-term rental license, the owner occupant has resided in the dwelling for 9 of the past 12 months or intends to reside in the dwelling for 9 of the next 12 months, as demonstrated by at least 2 of the following: utility bill, voter registration, motor vehicle registration, deed, lease, driver's license or state-issued identification, or proof of general homestead exemption. Subsection B2 states, owner-occupant means a natural person who either holds legal title to the property in their individual capacity or owns at least 25% of an entity or business that holds legal title to the property. That's quite a bit. That's the extent of an owner-occupancy exception that I had drawn up. That would be my offer to be taken up as the amendment to be made if Mr. McCarthy agrees, and he can get a second on that as well. And I can kind of further explain what that actually means in lay terms as well.
Mr. McCarthy?
It's like you read my mind. Yes, the language as offered by Council Kirsagosa, I'm happy to put forward in my amendment proposal.
So, conversation on the amendment.
Do we need a second on the amended motion?
Mr. Byers seconded.
Okay.
Discussion on this amendment?
On
Mr.
the
Preston?
amendment, yeah, so of the 66 that are currently, operating, do we have a feel for how many of those we're even talking that would meet the qualification currently of being owner-occupied? I mean, how much of a difference generally, given where things are at today, would this amendment even make?
There are about 7 that appear to be owner-occupied based on the information we have. Now, if you were to dig into exactly how long these folks live at a certain address, I'm not sure how that would shake out, but it would be something like that.
So current, just for perspective, so currently the 66 that we have that are operating, 49 of which are in R1 and R2. 7 of those we believe are owner-occupied, I mean, give or take, based on definitions. So the remaining 42 that do not appear to be would still be banned should this amendment pass and then the ultimate ordinance pass. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Byers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I support the amendment. I think that, and I know we'll have the broader conversation on the ordinance after this, but just a note on this amendment that I think, and not trying to preview the thoughts I'll make later, is I think there's a role for this in our community, and I don't think we want to have the broad ban, I think, as originally proposed tonight. And I think that this is a way to still allow short-term rentals in the community. I understand it's going to be in a limited capacity based off these qualifications, but I do think that there's benefits to short-term rentals, and I think that this allows us to still have these properties in our community with folks that are bringing value. And I think that we talk about kind of like economic development and tourism aspect of things. Like I think there's a fit, and I think that this would allow for there to be a fit while still acknowledging the concerns on the other side of residents. So I'm supportive of the amendment.
Ms. Smith?
It is my understanding that the original concept of Airbnbs, short-term rentals, was to provide homeowners that were living in areas where the property values were going up and the expense of maintaining their own home, paying the property taxes, was becoming so burdensome that they were faced with possibly moving out, or with this as an option, they had an opportunity to generate income without having to go to work, and it allowed someone who wanted to be in their home to remain in their home. And I think the couple that was here in November that spoke up as owners of a short-term rental where they were living in their home is a perfect example of why I think this exception needs to be in there, to provide that property owner with the opportunity to supplement their income. And as somebody who's most likely under the roof, when their guests are with them, they are much more aware of any activities or behaviors that would cause complaints. So for that reason, I'm supportive of this amendment as well.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Most of my comments are for the broader, but I just wanted to kind of remind everybody and level set that whatever action we take tonight, there's a 5-year period that all current short-term rental operators are going to be able to do tomorrow, whatever we pass today, for up to 5 years. I personally, I believe this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of this discussion. And I fully expect that we will come back to revisit this conversation. But as has been pointed out, we've been at this conversation for nearly a year now. and it's time to make some rules tonight. I'll make more comments for the general.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah.
I have many thoughts. On the owner occupied, which this is, folks, this is a wrinkle. This is a curveball. This is not typical of what we do to legislate at the dais, as we say. Now, yes, we as council were sent an urgent email 1 week ago tonight from our city manager that gave us a binary choice, ban or owner occupied. To which I said to Ms. Reese, what does owner occupied look like? Is that the VRBO commercial with the Alabama coach sharing the hot tub with the guests? To which she wrote back, LOL. Yes, I was thinking Coach Saban too. I said, okay, well, in that commercial, that is framed as being a negative, owner occupied, even if it is Nick Saban. So I think even as the data shows here today, we are going to effectively meet the worst scenario for many of the folks who were speaking about running short-term rentals well. We're going to get rid of 42 of the 49. It's effectively a ban. And to Ms. Metzger, who maintains this as a family home, not her primary residence, that someday she would like to retire into, she will be put out of business. Haunting me is the comment earlier about decision today, data tomorrow, mindset from China. I am really concerned, you can smile, I am really concerned that we are lacking in a due diligence here tonight. We are legislating at the table, something, Mr. Mayor, I know you loathe. This seems somewhat orchestrated, but nevertheless, we're legislating at the table because not all of us knew about this curveball. We were given a binary choice. You weighed in via email to all of us saying you didn't want this item B, the owner occupied, and gave your reasons why. Many of the reasons that the staff give have seemed to come back to do not operate a business in a residential zone. Does that mean I can't operate my house as a long-term rental? That's a business. And then I really kind of question the lack of the due process of how we even got to either of these choices, when a majority of the people here tonight cite who are owners and operators never being brought into the conversation. And so when I look back to where in the report the results of the study are, other than a table, there's no explanation of why we have eliminated many other potential restrictions. If you go back to the short-term rental regulation toolkit that we all got shortly after the fall work session, there's lots of ideas in here. Why were all of those other ideas, except for owner-occupied, dismissed? Where's that research? Why are we putting up owner-occupied as the best regulation? These are questions that haven't been answered and feel like a fast one has been pulled tonight.
Further discussion on the amendment?
Sure, Mayor. In my discussions with the council, my understanding is that there was discussion among all members on this as an option, so I'm surprised to hear that this is a surprise. I didn't personally talk to everybody, but from what I understand, some did, and so I'm a little surprised tonight to hear that this is a shock.
I would agree. I thought there was pretty robust one-on-one conversations over the last week or two on this very issue. Ms. Lorenz.
I beg to differ. 1 week ago, we were given the binary choice. On Wednesday, you sent a note unequivocally expressing your dislike for owner-occupied. Do you want me to get that email out? So I am surprised to hear you bring this up tonight in somewhat of a coordinated fashion. I doubt Mr. Quirsigosa just pulled that amendment together over the last hour and 15 minutes. I was not made aware that this was maybe going to be brought up tonight. Why would I think that when you sent a note unequivocally saying you didn't like owner-occupied? I am shocked. I am shocked at the lack of the due diligence. I am shocked that we are going back on something we do not do here, which is legislate at the table. And so you're going to call a vote on this here shortly. To vote for it means what? To vote against it means what?
I think that was laid out pretty clearly between Mr. McCarthy and Mr.
I guess I missed it. I need an explanation again. What does the vote for mean? What does the vote against mean?
Mr. Quirsigosa, would you?
Sure. So the motion on the floor is an amendment to add an owner occupancy exception to the prohibition from of STRs in R1A, R1B, and R2.
Well, that's a start. Can we add more?
Well, that's the motion that's currently on the table, I think.
We're discussing
That's what
this
CPA explained.
this amendment. You could offer another amendment if you would like.
Well, I'm not as prepared as the others that I didn't know we were going to legislate at the dais. We don't normally do that.
Ms. Smith?
I'd like to share my process in reviewing this particular agenda item. I had to go out of town this weekend, but I took my council computer with me, and on Thursday night, I saw I had a number of emails, and as I was going through them, I saw that many of them were on the short-term rental agenda item, which was part of what was available to me on Thursday night. Previously, the city manager had reached out and asked council members to respond to what their preference was. And I don't know that I sent an email because of my travel, but I know I communicated to her that my preference was to carve out the exception for owner-occupied. Today and yesterday, I did research by talking to Nick Martinez with Public Policy Airbnb. I was able to connect with Christy Ingerman of MRI. I reached out to a CPA that I know because I was curious about a contention that it would be difficult to verify owner occupancy. And the CPA friend of mine was shared with me that a taxpayer is only allowed to have one homestead exemption in all of the U.S. so that verifying someone's homestead exemption would categorically provide information as to which structure that individual claimed as their residence. Now, the mayor had reached out with his opinion and shared it with them to avoid violating the Open Meetings Act. No one was supposed to respond to that as a reply all, but we were welcome to and invited to reach out and connect to him one-on-one. Another council member had expressed as a blanket his opinion and asked if anyone was interested, he would be happy to talk with them. I responded to that request and engaged in a conversation with him by phone, just with that individual, to say, yes, this is my position and this is why I have it. And so I spoke to another council person before the meeting to discuss, I am in support of this. We debated back and forth. Two of us are allowed to talk on our own. It was something that We had that discussion, and now here, nothing prevents us as council members from talking to each other one-on-one. And that opportunity was, that invitation was extended to us. That opportunity existed at any time in the last 6 months, and it certainly was available to us as this packet became available to it. So I don't see where the surprise and shock is coming from if you're not exercising your agency as an elected person to engage in conversations with other people that are sitting at the table and have the ability to make decisions and cast votes.
Thank you.
May I reply to that, Mr. Mayor?
You've actually, we're not going to continue this argument. You've had your 2 opportunities to speak on the
But she's making an accusation about me that I did speak to you, in fact, and I've got it here. No, to Mr. Mayor.
She did not make that.
She's inferring that I did not speak to my counsel.
I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. I think that's something you could address with her.
Fair enough, Ms. Smith, we'll talk afterwards.
Further on that, please call the roll.
Mr. Byers?
Yes.
Mr. Roberge?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, that amendment is approved. And as I said, I don't want to hold any discussion back on this amendment. We agreed on rules a while ago that every council member had an opportunity to speak twice, 10 minutes at each meeting. And so I think there's a lot of discussion we need to have. There's a lot we owe the public in terms of our decision-making and considerations that we have on this amendment. So we'll start with that now. Who would like to start? Mr. Byers.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll try to be quick. I have a couple of questions, and I'll just go to comments. A couple of my questions I think were already answered. Mr. President asked how many are owner-occupied. What's kind of right now, what's kind of like the complaint system? Like, somebody reaches out to the town and says, hey, there's an issue here. What does that look like now with existing, the short-term rentals that exist and are operating?
The most common complaints will go to police if it's a police level issue. And then sometimes inspections will get complaints if it's property maintenance, parking off of a hard surface, that sort of thing. Those are probably the 2 main departments that get them. Sometimes people will call me because they'll ask a zoning question about it. I'm not sure if other departments really get calls about it. I mean, administration, they get comments through the portal, the website portal, so.
Thanks. Are there any trends? I mean, is it, noise, or what's the trend there, if there is one?
I don't know, it'd be hard to say a trend. I think there's certainly a group of people who have like the philosophical issue with it's a business running next door to me, and then why does that bother them? It's usually because there are just different people coming and going all the time, and it just is unsettling to not ever have a chance to even make a relationship. I guess to the point that someone earlier raised that, well, you could just walk next door if you had a problem with somebody. But if these are like a constantly rotating cast of characters, it's not that easy to do. And a lot of people don't want to kick up a fuss in person with someone because they worry that maybe it won't go well. Other complaints will include noise from outdoor events, people just being outside in the backyard. Because some of these properties, if you read their descriptions, are set up to be, great outdoor amenities, pretty elaborate things to do outside, and then you just have all these people now outside next door to your backyard. So we get that kind of complaint as well.
Okay, and then I think my last question is, do we have, it's okay if we don't, do we have just any data point on, like, I think there's, in the report, there's like 66 STRs operating now. Do we have any idea, like, how many of those there's been complaints about? Like, is it like, okay, 10% of them, or, any figure like that?
I do not have that figure.
That's okay. Thanks. Well, then I'll appreciate staff, and I'll share just a couple of my my thoughts. So one, I've received comments from both Airbnb operators that have concerns and who are proud of the value they've added to their properties and their stewardship of welcoming guests to the community. We've also received a lot of comments from residents who may live in a neighborhood near an Airbnb where it's operating and have concerns about the impact of that in their neighborhood. So for me, this is an issue where I hear both those perspectives, and I think that both of them, there are some valid concerns. I think what we have to do tonight is try to rectify those. And I'd echo the comment Councilman McCarthy made earlier, is that what we're doing tonight is, I think, taking a step towards more oversight of how these properties are operating. I personally am glad that we have this owner-occupied exemption included in the amendment, because that was something that I think is important, because we don't want to stifle entrepreneurship or welcoming folks into our community, but we do want to have some guidelines for the process. So I do view this amendment as a start, and I will support the ordinance that's proposed tonight. But I do think that, to Mr. McCarthy's point, I think this is something that we should continue to look at. And because we have a 5-year time period, which I'm in favor of preserving, we have some time to allow ourselves to continue to ensure that the ordinance that we've passed tonight is the best ordinance. And I'm guessing that we're going to probably have some changes between now and when this actually would be implemented. So those are my comments, and thanks to everybody that's reached out.
Ms. Smith?
Yeah, I've got some questions for staff. You mentioned a desire to preserve the integrity, the zoning integrity, because these are residential neighborhoods that a majority of these short-term rentals are located in, and that the town has taken action against other types of businesses that are operating in residential communities. Can you cite what typically is the trigger for instigating, taking action against a business operating a neighborhood? Because does that business register and that's how we know about it and we can stop it before they get started? Or is it usually triggered by a complaint of neighbors that are enduring whatever this business is generating that they feel violates their residential neighborhood?
Sure. I've been told I need to move the microphone back, which is somewhat ironic. Not quite sure how to process that. Typically, when we get these complaints, it's usually a complaint. It's somebody operating something. They haven't registered as a business. But it's however we learn about it. So inspections might learn either through a complaint or through even just noticing that somebody's got something in the neighborhood. That's when we will take action against improper business in a residential district. So there's a whole myriad of ways it could happen. A lot of times they come to us and say, hey, I want to start this business in my house, and we tell them, no, that wouldn't be allowed in your particular zoning district. So it's not even that we shut them down after the fact, but a lot of times, even ahead of time, when we find out that that's what the plans are, we'll advise them that that would be illegal.
If someone is working from home and their work is all virtual, would that trigger a violation of the zoning code under those circumstances if they're self-employed?
No, as long as it's not a customer-facing or you don't have customers coming to the location, then there's an exemption in our home-based business regulations in our zoning code that would allow for that.
Okay, so there are some exceptions for operating a business, and it's the interaction with customers that triggers the complaints, because it's that interaction that oftentimes would trigger the complaints from the neighbors?
Right.
Okay. What about the difference between police reports versus complaints? If a complaint is made, who in town staff is fielding those complaints?
Again, that's going to depend on the nature of the complaint and how it comes in. A lot of these complaints aren't going to rise to the level of police reports because just a bunch of neighbors making noise isn't necessarily illegal. So there are that's why we prohibit these businesses in zoning districts, is just because of their effect on the neighborhood generally. They may not rise to a level of it being illegal that would generate a police report. So it might be, say somebody's operating an illegal retail store in their house. and we would get the complaints. It wouldn't be, something like that wouldn't generate a police report. It would just be you're not allowed to do that because you can't do things like that in a residential zoned neighborhood.
Well, I was noticing as I was reading through emails, a point being made that existing ordinances should allow us to regulate short-term rentals. And from what you're saying, there are times when complaints are generated by the neighbors, or the neighbors are registering a complaint, but there's nothing illegal about the activity that would fall under a reason for the town to go out and either ticket them or register a complaint with the ownership to shut them down or fine them, correct?
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can operate a business that would be harmful to a neighborhood that wouldn't be an illegal act or wouldn't otherwise be an illegal act, which is why those businesses are prohibited in those zoning districts.
But Karen, I think, or Ms. Smith, I think some of the complaints that have been received that would generate a call to the police department generally would be an after-hours kind of thing. It'd be an evening or late at night if it's a noise complaint. Occasionally, and that might not result in a police report. It might just result in them stopping by, checking behavior, or driving by. Maybe it's quieted, but maybe they don't even stop. But the other thing could be a parking complaint. It's not necessarily a law enforcement issue. They might go out just to see if any parking violations have occurred. But when you ask of which department is going to receive the complaint, it depends on what the issue is. So there might be a call to the non-emergency police department number, or it might be a call or an email to the inspections department on the next morning asking why were there so many cars, or why is my neighbor running a business out of their home, kind of thing. Or it could be just an email to administration or a phone call to the mayor. So it's really dependent on what the issue is.
And in terms of the occupants of these short-term rentals running around 50 to 60%, do we know if hotel occupancy is at a stage where these short-term rentals are in fact taking a strain off of hotel occupancy? And if not for short-term rentals, there would be visitors that we'd be turning away. Do we have any data to support that?
No, we haven't gathered data from the Convention Visitors Bureau regarding hotel occupancy we just don't have that information.
But this exemption allows an owner-occupied property to continue to operate. And if you are not owner-occupied, you have 5 years to make any changes that you wish, including long-term rentals, short-term rentals longer than 30 days, or selling the investment property and repurchasing something in R3, correct? Could you clarify what type of properties in Normal are R3 zoned, and what would be the availability of making a purchase of something to be used as a short-term rental in an R3?
Sure. So in the R3 districts, which are spread across the community, there are multifamily units, there are attached townhomes, there are duplexes, there are some single-family structures that happen to be in R3 zoning. So it's kind of the full range of housing types.
And I know one individual expressed a preference for actually a shorter time period for converting, but as someone who's experienced good economies and bad economies, 5 years is a reasonable time frame to find the timing right if your effort is to sell the property and try to do so when the market is up. So,
correct. Yeah, 5 years is what we looked at. That's what we see in a lot of zoning cases. And that's where it came from, is zoning where oftentimes a property will get downzoned and its structure becomes a non-conforming use after a zoning change. 5 years seems to be a standard amount of time where courts have generally said that's okay to amortize that change to bring the property in compliance. So the 5 years is a standard we looked at. used in a lot of legal cases concerning zoning. We're also talking about 5 years, but actually the ordinance is 5 years with a process where if you can prove that you've made extraordinary investment in the property and you're not going to get that back, there's an appeal process for even a longer time if your investment can't be recuperated within that 5-year period. So it's not just 5 years, but it's 5 years for the standard.
Right, and I was going to jump in and add that that was a topic of a conversation, or at least a question that was brought up at the October work session, whether or not there was a way to recognize investment made into the property and an attempt to get some return on the investment if we were to make an ordinance change.
Well, I just wanted to say that there is a lot of
That's
nuance.
You've exceeded your time limit, so hold that for your next round.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Mr. Preston.
I want to pick up with some additional questions for staff about complaints specifically, as Mr. Byers and Ms. Smith both commented on that, and it is listed as one of the goals for this ordinance that staff sees that it would accomplish one of several goals, number 3 being reducing complaints pertaining to STRs in lower density residential areas. So we've kind of talked about that to begin with. Can we quantify what complaints look like on short-term rentals in any context? How many properties get complaints? What's the general nature of complaints? How frequently? I mean,
No.
is there any
There's no tracking of that.
Okay, but that is listed.
For me.
Sorry,
No,
I was
no,
going to say,
please.
it's very limited. I would say quantifying, not any useful data, because there's very little data in terms of the number of complaints. I can say Mayor Coos has met with residents. Residents have called inspections department with some issues on certain properties on certain streets that we could identify, but there's no assurance that that's the only place where a problem is going to occur again, if that makes sense. So do we and we attempted to acknowledge this in the report. We're not suggesting that every short-term rental generates problems. We are suggesting that a short-term rental, which functions like a hotel, is a business that the zoning code doesn't permit. On top of that, and I just lost my train of thought, so I'll get back to that. But back to the issue of complaints, we unfortunately don't have a specific number or can quantify that.
Okay, so within
Let me add to that, Mr. Preston, because there are, I'm sure we've all been contacted by people with concerns. So you wouldn't call it a formal complaint when somebody calls us, you know, and sometimes I've asked, is this a formal complaint? And they're like, no, this is a problem in our neighborhood and we'd like you to do something about it. So that makes it even that much harder to say there's a quantified number. Now, if I had a lot of calls like that, I have, but I can't quantify it.
Yeah. So per our council report on this item, quote, by adopting the proposed ordinance prohibiting new short-term rentals in R1 and R2 districts and phasing out existing short-term rentals with an amortization period, the town would accomplish several goals. One is preserving the majority of the community's housing stock for long-term habitation, whether by owner or renter. 2 is limiting the negative impact short-term rentals may have in driving up housing prices and rental rates, particularly within the range of more affordable properties. Number 3, reducing complaints pertaining to short-term rentals in lower density residential areas. And so I guess, I mean, that listed as one of, and then there's a 4th about preserving the residential nature of neighborhoods by honoring the manner in which the zoning code already prohibits public-facing businesses residential zoning. So, I mean, if it's listed as one of the primary goals of this entire thing, and we can't quantify it, I mean, just even like within the context of short-term rentals and, you know, whether it's negligible or not, you know, I question if you take out a handful of neighbors to one specific property. How many complaints, informal or formal, have we received? I feel like the only one that I've heard from is one of the neighbors came and spoke again tonight, and it was nothing that would even qualify, I don't think, for a police report or inspections report or anything else. It's just that the property, by nature of its use, does not feel part of the neighborhood, which, that, I understand that concept and that argument, but I would not consider that a complaint within the context of we need to limit short-term rentals because of complaints. That doesn't meet the standard for me. So going on with this, have we looked at complaints? Because if we get rid of short-term rentals, we can still keep long-term rental for these housing. Hypothetically, every short-term rental today could convert to, 6-month leases, 12-month leases, and that would still be perfectly applicable, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Have we looked at complaints for rental properties in single-family neighborhoods, or even just looked overall at inspections complaints for properties and how they tend to trend? Overall. And my point being, complaints is not specific to short-term rentals. And you could have a neighbor who owns their property and lives there and never rents out a bedroom or the place forever, but doesn't, take care of their landscaping, and the house is in disrepair. And, you can hear complaints regardless of who your neighbor is or how the neighboring property is utilized. You can hear complaints for long-term rentals, and it doesn't sound like we have any data to substantiate other than just kind of the anecdotal, whatever, for it being a short-term rental specific issue. I don't buy that. So that's one. Second, in fact, I would make or I would at least throw out the likely assertion that in some cases, from an inspection standpoint, short-term rental may in fact reduce complaints of property maintenance issues, given by the fact that the average permit for short-term rentals is $15,600, give or take, and that obviously does not include any cosmetic items that I'm sure many of the short-term rentals have been benefited from beyond that. Point being, by nature of the market that short-term rentals are in, they, logic would suggest they can't be in disrepair, they can't be falling apart, look really outdated, unkept. If they did, they wouldn't get rented, right? So, are there properties that were in distress before, got picked up as short-term rentals, and then received the benefit, beautified the neighborhood, whether or not, any other properties in the neighborhood followed suit? That specific property, I know that we've had instances of that, as is articulated by the average permit amount for the short-term rentals. I feel like, let's see, another question for staff. So we have, of the 66 current operating short-term rentals, 30 of which are owned by individuals or entities in Normal or in Bloomington. Is that correct? 15 properties, short-term rental properties, are owned Normal, 15 are owned by Bloomington. Mm-hmm. The remaining 36 properties then, is there any more data for where those owners are? You suggested they're primarily in Illinois. Mm-hmm. How about rural McLean County, within 20, 30-minute driving distance? Because I view that considerably different than an owner in Chicago who, taking 2 hours to get down.
Sure. I do have the actual list and could count it if I had 1 second, but I can tell you it's a good chunk of the remaining number that are central Illinois, I would say. It's not mostly Chicago area, but I would say it's a good chunk. So I could count it up, but it's off the top, it's not mostly Chicago.
Is that something you have that
I
at the
literally
table?
have it in front of me, yes. I
You
would
do?
need to put my glasses on, and I would encourage you to talk about something else in the
I
meantime.
will ask another question, not to you, and allow you time to count that up as long as my time is not expired yet. Some thoughts I guess I have while we're waiting on that. So, I look at short-term rentals primarily as a property-specific neighborhood issue first. I think that the context in which we hear about short-term rentals is about a specific house, and it's hearing it from neighbors who don't like that people are coming and going often. They don't know their neighbors. It does not feel part of the neighborhood community that exists. There are times of noise and parking, and, I'm sure garbage and party issues that go along with that. But first and foremost, it's an issue where a specific property impacts those who live right around it. And I think there are a number of people who would probably be fine with, 1, maybe 2 short-term rentals in their neighborhood, but don't want 10. And of course, then separate from the amount, if there are specific problem properties, which does not sound, because of the complaints conversation, that there is, if there were specific problem properties, that would be something to address. But overall, I just don't see the big issue here. Ms. Davison, is that enough time for you?
It is.
Okay,
It is about
please.
half. Half is like nearby, and the other half is either Chicago or Quincy.
Okay, and we're talking half of the owners or half of the properties or both, roughly? Because we have 66 properties.
There are so
42
many
owners.
lists. Yes, that's a good point. Half of the properties.
Okay.
But in terms of the ones that are in Illinois, there's
Correct.
still the additional
There's
ones
still-
that are owned from
right.
people outside of Illinois.
Right.
Okay. I'll give another big picture thought and then I'll allow others to speak. So I voted yes on the amendment a little bit ago because if there's going to be regulation on this, I would rather allow the additional 7 that are likely 7 that could be considered owner occupied. I would rather allow them to operate than not if something is going to pass tonight. But I have a lot of issue with this ordinance that's proposed, as well as the process overall to get here. I don't see the compelling case in any substantive way other than some neighbors don't feel a short-term rental home is part of their neighborhood. I mean, that seems to be the most compelling reoccurring theme that I have heard on that. Valid argument, but not something for us to make a blanket ban from based on that from my standpoint. And let's see, and in looking at this process from where we were in October, at which point I thought that the council recommended staff kind of dive deeper into it for the following 6 months. It seems like we have come back to tonight really what was proposed the first time that we had then in October requested an additional 6 months on to, kind of dig deeper into it. And so I'm, when this conversation came to a head in the last couple of weeks, I was surprised that we're back to, pretty much the same recommended result as we were in October originally. But I would note that of the 27 communities, municipalities in Illinois that are included.
Mr. Preston, I'm going to
This
ask
is
you
my
to
last
wrap
point,
up your.
but this is a good one, so I don't want to miss it. Of the 27 that are listed as municipalities that regulate short-term rentals in Illinois, Bloomington, all of the ones downstate, central Illinois, Bloomington, Champaign, Urbana, Peoria, Springfield, none of them ban short-term rentals, owner-occupied or not. We would be the one and only at this point in time. I'll yield.
Ms. Lorenz.
Everything he just said. But I do have a couple of questions, in all seriousness, for staff. And I'm not going to ask you if you have data, because it sounds like you don't. Why are long-term rentals not considered businesses?
It's the difference between using it as a lodging, like a hotel, versus an actual residence. So we have residences in residential neighborhoods.
Is it a business? I see some people nodding their head behind you.
I guess I'd say, I look at the attorneys, like, it's a legal business because it's a residence. If someone's I think you mean if someone's
It's not a
renting out, like,
home-based business
you
the
own it.
way, or a prohibited business in our zoning code.
It's a legal use of property.
Correct.
I'll let the audience decide what they think of that answer. I've already covered the point about the process being very unconventional. what we've watched earlier. But here's my last question. Why were the owners, operators of these 60-some businesses not engaged? Or if they were, tell me more about that and who spoke to them.
We did not set up meetings and conversations with short-term rental owners. Some may consider the shortcoming in the process. In terms of the issues at hand, however, the issue is whether or not the operation is a business and legal per our zoning code. It's not debatable in terms of how they're using or whether or not they would change how they're using it. They're already given the rules when they are a certified STR. It says in the rules they have to comply with zoning code. So we know from experience that that's a business. That's not what our zoning code allows. So we are coming to council with what we hoped was a solution that doesn't address every issue, but does address the use of an illegal business in an R1 and R2 district. And it does then direct, the recommendation then directs the business to be allowed in R3 and commercial districts.
My last question. Sorry, I lied. I thought that was my last question, but I have one more for Ms. Davison. Why was the one regulation that I, like Mr. Preston, somewhat begrudgingly voted for, because it's like, well, it's something, would like to see more regulation, quite honestly, more well thought out, because I don't, while I think owner-occupied is a plausible regulation, it's not enough. I think about my little cul-de-sac with 8 houses on it. If 2 of the houses become, because we're owner-occupied, become used as short-term rentals while the owners winter in Florida or some other warm climate, and those 2 have 5 guests over each, there's going to be a lot of parking problems on the cul-de-sac. And then if one of the other 6 structures suddenly goes up in flames, good luck getting into the cul-de-sac or some other emergency. So what I'm getting at here, illustratively, I hope, is that we are missing the mark on other regulations, i.e. separation. Also, things like talking to the neighbors. You can have your STR license as long as other neighbors agree to it, that you can get sign-off from neighbors. I mean, I'm not making this up, okay? These are other communities that do this. I'd encourage you to read this toolkit. So I guess a long-winded way around the question, Mercy, is why were the others dismissed?
Oh, all the other potential regulations?
Yes.
Well, for us, the fundamental issue is running the business in a single-family neighborhood. So the extra regulations would not get to that, would not solve that problem.
So if we go with the owner-occupied, we're not solving that problem either.
Well, I think with owner-occupied, the idea is that it is someone's residence and they are there, and it's more like having a guest. I mean, it is somewhat different, somewhat
So it's going to be Nick
distinguishable.
Saban sharing the hot tub.
Say that again?
So in addition, but I can say, let's say if we could get past the business or the owner occupancy issue, I think Ms. Davison at least mentioned it verbally when in her initial comments, suggestions such, or regulations such as distance separations. We looked at the impact of that, but, and you've seen the map, which is page 815, the map that shows the current locations. And I'm just going to take the liberty of, you mentioned Peoria. I'll take, or I'm sorry, maybe Mr. Preston mentioned Peoria. Peoria, as we identified on page 816 of the packet, does have regulations pertaining to distance. The issue would be all these 66 currently exist would be in violation of distance separations. So then you grandfather 66, and then what you're left with is just the exterior subdivisions at the, around the outside of town. So none of them would comply. That's the challenge.
I appreciate the attempt at the answer. I mean, I'm going to just wrap up the questions and say that I think Mr. Preston summed up the concerns. I too, like I said, voted for the owner occupancy as at least a start, but it fails in my standard of the due process. There's no clear answer as to why these folks were not more substantively engaged. I don't get the distinction on the business, not business piece. Got a lot of nodding heads back there when we asked about the distinction of a long-term rental being a business. Had a lot of heads back there saying yes. So that does not appear to be unequivocally answered. I don't understand how it was that you dismissed some of the other regulations. The process, I'm back to where I started. The process has been flawed, and I'm very, very disappointed. And just think it's bad legislation right now. We need to go back to the drawing board.
Further? Mr. Preston?
Yep, I'm going to go back and sum up.
I gave you 3 extra minutes in the first go. No, I'm kidding.
I will take
You
less
got your
than the
full
7. You can have your 3 minutes. I'll make it up to you here. So the conversation about it being a business or not being a business, the 7, assuming that that's the number that are owner-occupied, they would still be customer-facing, public-facing businesses, and the owner-occupied do not meet the standard that we've been talking about anyway, right? So the amendment actually, in that way, contradicts from the goal of the zoning compatibility, not having businesses. Well, the owner-occupied would be allowed, but they are also considered businesses, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's part of the reason that this wasn't staff's recommendation.
Okay. So it all comes down to the last paragraph in the council packet, that by adopting the proposed ordinance on short-term rentals, the town would accomplish several goals. Number 1, preserving the majority of the community's housing stock for long-term habitation, whether by an owner or a renter. That's true. I don't know why why does that matter? I mean, if you have a long-term renter versus a short-term renter, what should matter is problem properties' impact on, property maintenance, the like. But yes, that part is technically true, though I don't see the reason for it. Number 2, eliminating the negative impact short-term renters have on driving up housing prices and rental rates, particularly in the range of more affordable housing. As Mr. I believe McClellan mentioned, the 66 or so properties that are currently operating are roughly 1/3 of 1% of the homes, single-family homes in Normal. The impact on the market, that being a justification for this, does not pass the sniff test. The third goal that would be accomplished is reducing complaints pertaining to short-term rentals in lower density residential neighborhoods. We've talked about that. I can't find a compelling argument there. And then preserving the residential neighborhoods by honoring the manner in which zoning already prohibits public-facing businesses in residential zoning, which our amendment contradicts with, but nonetheless, they would still allow long-term rentals. I mean, I think a lot of this is weak, and there's room for some sort of addressing the issue of short-term rentals. What's been brought to us tonight, much like what was brought to us in October, doesn't meet the standard, in most of the ways that I try and look at this for me. And so I will be voting no, and would encourage the other council members here to do the same, or to table, though I believe that's unlikely, to take another stab at this. Thanks.
Ms. Smith?
I believe I have an answer to the question of renting long-term is a business, but renting short-term isn't a business, but renting short-term is. From a tax standpoint, the rental income for a short-term rental is treated the same way or in a similar fashion to rent income from lodging or hotels. And the tax code even provides for a different treatment of the depreciation of real properties. But a long-term rental is an investment, and it actually enjoys a more favorable, shorter depreciation period. So the tax code makes a distinction, and I think we're consistent to say there is a difference between a property owner who is renting it long-term to tenants versus someone who is experiencing turnover and renting it on a short-term basis for visitors or the like for under the 30 days that this stipulates. What it boils down to is competing interests of property owners. The property owners that are in a neighborhood that bought their properties and have made it their homes with the idea that they are looking to establish relationships with their neighbors. They have a certain expectation of the behaviors that their neighbors will exhibit. They don't have any control over that when the neighbors in a short-term rental are continually changing as the guests come and go at those properties. So in terms of whose property rights take precedence, well, I think we have to recognize that individuals that have made communities their home have a vested interest in being concerned about their expectations of what constitutes a neighbor. And while I applaud the owners that have gone out of their way to identify themselves, provide contact information to their neighbors, that is not always the case. My conversation with the policy liaison person with Airbnb was not very fruitful. He indicated that he'd only been in this position for 6 months and acknowledged that no such position had existed even a year ago. And so these platforms are not providing any kind of outlet for neighbors who want to make a complaint. They have a button now, but it's not on the front page. You have to know how to get to it in order to register your complaint with them. And so for the argument that we should be able to regulate these complaints with existing ordinances or processes or channels, as we've heard from the discussion of the situation, there are complaints that are legitimate complaints, but they aren't illegal. And again, it comes down to whose property rights take precedence. I'm in favor, and I voted for the exception for owner-occupied because when you're living in your home and you find your costs going up, your ability as an elderly person to generate additional income is fairly limited. This offers them an opportunity to supplement their income to help with that. For those individuals who are not living in a short-term rental, they have more choices. They can rent it out long-term, they can sell it and purchase, if they want to stay in this business, and purchase something in an R3. And so, yes, I do support and defend the exception for the owner-operated. And I would be voting in favor of it because I am in support of the property owners that have come to us with complaints.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to try not to go over too much of what's already been covered. I guess I want to start first and back up a little bit and say thank you to everybody for showing up tonight and speaking to us, those that called, some that I talked to, some that I did not, left me messages, emails. I greatly appreciate all the perspectives. There's certainly strong opinions on both sides, for and against STRs in the community, but that helps to inform me where the edges are and what we need to try to solve and fix here. For me, certainly there was goals that staff took away from the council discussion last time. You know, in addition to preserving character and integrity of our neighborhoods that we saw here, it's certainly to give space for local and small business owners to operate. Certainly, you know, that's a goal I think that we should all have, but also to create reasonably simple rules that specify licensing and accountability that are not overly burdensome for operators or for the town to try to figure out and manage. That doesn't add a lot of cost and a lot of time on either side of the equation. So whatever happens with this vote tonight, as I mentioned earlier, is to remember that this isn't going to affect any current operators for 5 years. And so, and with a potential for longer if you're demonstrating that there isn't an ROI within that period of time for your investment in the property. Thank you for reiterating that. I had forgotten that point. So for me, again, I said this earlier, but this is the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. I do believe that we need to take some action tonight. I'm not convinced that we have the best solution tonight. We have a start of a framework, right? So right now we heard, you know, existing regulations really don't address other than some obvious things. You know, a loud rock party going on in a backyard and a short-term rental at midnight is an obvious noise violation that's going to get addressed by our current code, but there's some other ones. And we heard tonight two different perspectives on one short-term rental in a neighborhood. So obviously we're trying to thread needles here to balance the property rights of those who use their homes as primary residence and those who want to use those as an investment. We're going to need, me personally, I feel like all of us need certainly to have some conversations out in the marketplace. And certainly we want to avoid situations that were described like tonight, whatever the, you know, whichever perspective you want to pay most attention to, but that's the fear out in the community. And it's legitimate. It's not just anecdotal. We have real people having real problems with short-term rentals in neighborhoods. And putting something in place and a carve-out to allow some operations is the beginning of a structure to have some rules and accountability in place for short-term rentals which do not exist today. And so again, this isn't perfect. It's a start. It's the beginning of a conversation, and with a relatively long runway, 5 years, to try to improve, tweak, whatever, however you want to look at that situation, but adjust. So for me, it's important that we take some action to start to put a structure of rules in place for some accountability that isn't addressed by our current code, and then to continue to adjust as we go along and get experience with conversations from the marketplace. I'll stop there. Thanks, Mayor.
Ms. Reese?
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy stole some of my words. Clearly, this isn't a perfect ordinance, and staff never expected unanimity, nor, you know, we never intended to imply that this was perfect or a solution to everything. You know, if council chose tonight to adopt nothing, we would move forward with status quo. We have 66 short-term rentals today. In 2026, we don't know. Maybe we'd have 75 or 8. We have no idea. We don't know what the future is. We're just simply trying to present to council a relatively reasonable option to address some of the issues that we've heard in the last couple of years following our work session last October and communications by email and conversations with all sorts of folks. So again, is this perfect? No. And now, of course, we're we're addressing the amended ordinance, which is a short-term rental with owner occupancy in R1 and R2, and we would then figure out how to apply that and make that as reasonable as possible compared to others. So this doesn't eliminate short-term rentals immediately. It does, again, try to offer some sort of acknowledgement to those that have invested in their property, giving them at least 5 years for them to convert to a longer-term residential situation or do something else with their property if they so choose. But again, as we can see from the conversation tonight, there's quite a varied set of opinions by council on right here at this table. So I appreciate all the effort that staff did to pull information together. While we didn't share everything that was considered, because just looking at what other communities do, there's a lot of options out there. But we have looked at those situations to figure out how would those apply, how would those situations apply in normal, and generally landed with those tend to create even more issues than solve problems. We are a university town. We have to keep in mind those things and situations that we deal with in terms of residential needs and the like. So again, this, wherever council lands on the ordinance tonight, we will move forward and address accordingly. Thank you.
I've got some thoughts I'd like to talk about. I think this was a very solid conversation tonight. The public comment had a lot of good comments in it that we need to consider. The staff had good comments. The council, while not completely on the same page on this, raised some interesting questions that I think are very appropriate in that. And so I'm just going to talk about two of them tonight, and that is the issue of how do we identify the good actor and punish the bad actor. I mean, that's a valid question, and there are probably ways to do that, but those ways are going to take staff time. It's going to take your time as owners of the property, and we all know those kind of time investments require people to do that. Who's going to do that work? There was a lot of conversation about we don't have solid data on numbers of complaints. So we have complaints to police, we have complaints to council, we have complaints to inspections department, we have citizens complaining to each other about this issue. So how do you quantify those numbers? You can do a lot of this kind of thing, but it's going to require personnel, and personnel are going to cost money. Now, do we do it with licensing fees, where we'll say to the owners of these properties, yes, we'll do all this that you're asking to get you better information, but who's going to pay for it? So do we charge you $1,000, $2,000 a year to license so we can gather the data that you want to understand what's going on? It's something we have to deal with when we're asked as a community, as an entity, to do something. You've got to remember there's a cost associated with doing that and how we pay for that. Interestingly, a couple of years ago, we were at National League of Cities, and one of the senior members of Airbnb was doing a presentation on some of these issues. And I did not engage in the conversation, but I listened to Councilman McCarthy have a very long conversation with that gentleman about some of these issues. And it was clear to me, and it was clear to Councilman McCarthy, that they weren't all that interested in having that conversation. And they were, as Ms. Smith said today, where she tried to get some quantifiable data. They probably have that data, but data is money today, and they're not willing to give that up. So that's an issue we have to deal with. Part of my investigation on this is I talked to 3 hotel managers here in the community, and I said, what happens when you have a bad actor? What happens when you have a hotel tenant that's giving you trouble? And they said, well, first thing we try to do is de-escalate the issue. And all 3 of them had the exact same answer. we try to de-escalate the situation. If we can't de-escalate the situation, we call the non-emergency number of the police, and we have a police officer come over and escort them from the property. Also, we file an order of violation of trespass against that person, and that person's in our system and is not allowed to come to our hotels again because of those issues. So there's a solution to the bad actor, but how do we implement that? That's an issue. And again, I'm not trying to trash Airbnb in that, but they're certainly not interested in being part of that solution. When we get to neighborhood complaints and that, there are a lot of people that will do that anecdotally, but they're nervous about being part of the problem, part of the solution to the problem. They ask, why is this going on in my neighborhood? This is a single-family neighborhood. Why is it a small hotel operating in my neighborhood? Why are there parties in their backyard every night or every weekend night, let's say? Why are there cars parked on the street and we can't park on the street because there's no parking? These are issues we have to address. And so I'll circle back to what Mr. McCarthy and City Manager Reese said. We've got 5 years to start figuring this out. There are some solutions there, and we're not going to solve them tonight. We're definitely not. But there's an opportunity to do some of this, and it's going to take everybody trying to work hard and together to solve this solution. It won't be easy, but we've got time to do it, and I'd suggest that's how we approach this moving forward. Please call the roll.
May I ask a question of clarification about
Sure.
Even with the amendment of the owner-occupied, do any of these changes take effect immediately, or are they all 5 years, including the owner-occupied?
The owner occupancy would take effect when the ordinance takes effect. The currently operating STRs in R1 and R2 that aren't owner occupied, for instance, that would otherwise be illegal under the ordinance can continue to operate for at least 5 years, as they have been.
So but the owner occupancy requirement would be for new certified STRs in R1 and R2 would have to be owner occupied.
Correct.
So any of these people out here today who are not living in the residence as their primary residence have 5 years to either make it their primary residence or divest of the short-term rental.
Correct.
Or take it to long-term.
Or take it to long-term, right.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Roberge?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
No. No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The item is approved. Let me find my agenda here. That ordinance has been amended and approved. We have one item of new business tonight. That is a motion to adjourn to executive session, but there doesn't seem to be a need to have that executive session. Thank you. So we will not do that. We do have one public commenter at the end of the meeting, Mr. Ulmer. That's what you signed up for, Mr. Ulmer.
Anyway, I'll make it more lighthearted and shorter than I would have. And I'll probably address you later or send you email. To make it lighthearted, I went to Dairy Queen today and I ordered a small strawberry sundae. And there was only syrup and ice cream. I said, where are the strawberries? Well, the cup is so small, there's only room for syrup and ice cream. Now, a month ago or so, I ordered a medium, and it actually had strawberries in it. She said, "Would you like some strawberries?" I said, "Yes, please." And she gave me strawberries in an additional cup. Now, when you order strawberry sundae, you expect strawberries in it. Words have meaning, but not always, okay? So if you order a small one, don't expect strawberries. You have to ask for them. Okay, getting back to the normal, I sent y'all an email. I used the Civics Plus or Civics, whatever, for the first time. Normally, I just send you, use all your individual email addresses, and it says contacting mayor and council. I did not scroll to the bottom. I did not realize that Ms. Reese is a member of the council. I got a response from her. I thought I was sending an email to the mayor and the council, to the elected officials. I didn't want a response from the staff. But that's how it appears on the website. If it had said mayor, council, and Ms. Reese, I would have known who I was sending it to. Now, this might seem trite, but words have meaning. I was just as surprised as when I didn't get any strawberries in my strawberry sundae that she got a copy. So I suggest you change it. I don't care if you say, address, send an email to mayor, council, and city manager. And I have another question. You guys made sure we couldn't vote on representation because we were a town. How come she and prior town managers have always been referred to as city manager? You claim we're a town when you don't want to let the citizens have a choice. But her title, and this is not personal, Ms. Reese, okay? But the city manager, it says city manager, but we're not a city, we're a town.
Time's up, Mr. Elmer.
Thank you.
Motion for adjournment.
I just wanted to share that there is an announcement on the public website indicating that the Town of Normal is hosting a comment period and public hearing on the Community Development Block Grant Program Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. And there are links on the website where you can do it remotely. But there's also a public meeting scheduled for 5:30 p.m. June 26th at the Normal Fire Department headquarters offices on Main. And if you have an interest in CDBG programs, I would encourage you to either submit your response or show up to that meeting and discuss the program. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to take us maybe to a little more sobering topic of the tent encampment that has been cleared by AutoZone on Main Street, the tent encampment. And that construction has begun by Binward, Bloomington Normal Water Reclamation District. And I just want to give some compliments to the public services that have helped in a very dignified way see to it that those inhabitants found another location. Ultimately, of course, we want these folks not to be in tent encampments. We want them to be in structures and find their way back to permanent housing. But in the meantime, we needed to relocate about a half dozen or so members of our community. And I'd like to compliment the help and knowledge of the Ecology Action Center. They are one of our partners that we fund, and they have been just tremendously invaluable in this case. Benward has been a tremendous resource. They don't always get a lot of accolades. They are a line item on your water bill. They have a very important topic of keeping our water treated and before it gets back into our water treatment system. So they are very environmentally conscious as well. And then, tactically, the police and the public works that have helped in the cleanup, and we have another final cleanup planned for Wednesday, has been very, very helpful, and I've appreciated the public services helping with that. And to our firefighter friends, if you ever want to connect with our street outreach folks so that you have a better understanding of their current location and who's out there, I'd be happy to connect you with that as well. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Roberge?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned.